Hello everyone and welcome to Columbia Business School Executive Education. My name is Jason Ballant and I'll be your host for our time together today. We're going to be talking about business-to-business marketing strategy, and we're here with Professor Miklos Sarvary, and we're very happy that he's taken some time from his busy schedule today to join us. Before we get started, I do want to let you know that Professor Sarvary is teaching a program. It's actually a brand new program for us entitled Business-to-Business Marketing Strategy. That's coming up October 7th through 9th here at our Columbia University campus in New York City. So we invite you to really listen today, think about what you're hearing, and engage with us. If you think you might want to take it to the next level, learn more about business marketing. Throughout the presentation today, I want to encourage you to use the chat window just below the presentation to ask questions. Just like in our in-person programs here in New York, we do want to encourage it's a two-way conversation here. We want you to ask questions throughout and engage with us and with each other so that we can enrich the conversation. So we do encourage you to do that. And with that, I will say hello to my colleague, Professor Miklos Sarvary. His expertise in marketing focuses on action and media, and he's used his research and experience to consult global companies such as Samsung, Pearson, McKinsey, Dun & Bradstreet, and PricewaterhouseCoopers. He's also been faculty at Harvard Business School and Stanford, and formerly with IBM. His most recent book is called Gurus and Oracles, The Marketing of Information, and it's our great pleasure to have him with us today. Miklos, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much, Jason, for this nice introduction. It is really a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I really would like to spend quite a little time on this topic because I would like to encourage you to ask questions, and hopefully there will be many, and also to explore the topic much more in detail in October. So business-to-business marketing, I wanted to first, just do a quick definition. What is business-to-business marketing? Really, it is marketing to organizations as opposed to individuals. And one other thing that is quite important is that you're marketing products that are going to be used to create other products. And this is important because, usually we say in marketing that you've got to understand your customers. Well, if you are in business-to-business marketing, not only you have to understand your customers, but you really have to understand your customers' customers as well. So their business problem. In many ways, you are a consultant to your own customer. So how is this definition going to change business-to-business marketing compared to what we learn in consumer marketing, which is much more often that we listen to that topic? Well, if you ask people, there is going to be a couple of things that come to mind, such as you have fewer customers in the first place, so you have the possibility to talk to them. You've got fewer transactions with higher dollar value, so each transaction can be almost treated like a business case as opposed to like just checking transactions in. Many times people mention that marketing is more of a general management function. You are sort of not separating that much general management from marketing. There is a high degree of functional interdependence. So oftentimes, these high-ticket transactions, they have a lot of other components attached to them, such as financing and insurance. So and most often, like services. So that requires that multiple functions in the organizations get connected to the marketing function. You also see usually a higher degree of product complexity. And this, I say that because when we do a business-to-business marketing transaction, usually it's not just, here is the product, give me sort of the payment. Usually there is a contract, there are terms and conditions, there is a lot going on. So the whole transaction is actually more complex. My conclusion on this slide is that these are quite superficial distinctions. It's not because a transaction is larger that it's all that different from a consumer transaction. And consumer to consumer, or sort of business to consumer transactions can be also very large, and also in another way, in the reverse, business to business transactions can be small. So these are really quite superficial differences. The real two conceptual difference to business marketing, I believe, is that in the value creation process, So when you create value to your customers, you are creating value much, much more in terms of process and relationship benefits rather than functional benefits. And I will put a little bit more structure to this statement. What is it that we do in business-to-business marketing really at the end of the day is fundamentally different most of the time, not always, but most of the time than what we do in consumer marketing. And similarly, the fact that we are selling to organizations means that everything that we have learned about consumer decision-making process, which is really consumer psychology, like the kind of things that turn consumers on, all of those we can pretty much throw out of the window because an organization is usually a totally different entity. There is an organizational buying process that we talk about, but this is very, very different across organizations. There's a huge discovery process that needs to precede the sales process, where you try to figure out what is the decision-making unit, and this buzzword DMU stands for that. And I think that there is a whole half a day to be held about what is the decision-making unit and how do you sort of learn about it, and then what is the decision-making process within the organization, and this is what DMP stands for. So these two things, I believe, are conceptually and fundamentally different in B2B marketing compared to B2C marketing. So let me just try to sort of show you a couple of differences and some of the core implications of these differences. So let me get back to this distinction between functional benefits, process, and relationship benefits. So here are a couple of examples. Functional benefits really are what first comes to mind when we think about a product or a service benefit. This has to do with specifications, essentially. This has to be with the core promise of the product. So in the case of consumer goods, so for example, if I'm thinking about sunglasses, the functional benefit is going to be how much do I block the sun for your eyes. But it will also be, in the case of consumer goods marketing, the looks, right? Which is one of the primary benefits that sunglasses are providing to the customers. So just because of the words function and usage, don't think that we are only talking about the technical specs. Really, usage and functional benefits are the core promise of the product. And most of the time in consumer goods, this is what we are focusing on, and rightly so. Now, let me talk about process and relationship benefits. So process benefits have to do with the benefits the customers get when they actually obtain the product. How hard, how easy it is to get the product. And usually, again, in consumer goods, it's not such a big deal. There are stores around now, there is e-commerce, and there is a whole separate industry, a separate infrastructure that takes care of making sure that consumers do have access to the actual product, right? Well, in B2B marketing, often you have to take care of this. There is what we call a distribution system, but the interaction with the distribution system is going to be much less standard than in the case of consumer goods, where you have to make sure that you get some shelf space. Well, here there's going to be large contracts involved, your sales force is going to get involved. Maybe you won't even have a distribution channel. Maybe it's your sales force directly selling to customers that matters. So process benefits have to do with all the engineering of how the product is getting to the customer site. And in some cases, this is the largest undertaking of the transaction. So think about an oil company, selling oil to a refinery. Well, how to organize the almost like industrial process of getting the oil to the refinery is a big deal. And I would like to argue it's a bigger deal even than sort of like making sure that I am paying for the oil at the spot price. A third group of benefits is related to relationships. And we talked about at the very beginning that often in B2B marketing, you have smaller transaction sizes. The sales force has got a role usually. The relationship to client is much, much more important than in the case of B2C. In the case of B2C transactions. In the case of B2C transactions, it's really the brand that has got a relationship, but it's not individuals. Versus in B2B, where often, you do have a personal relationship with a client that may last for like years and years and years, and you nurture this relationship. So all of these types of benefits which is really just a categorization, are important, and probably they are important to some extent in B2C and in B2B, but the emphasis on them is very different across B2C and B2B. Okay, and let me illustrate this with another example. So think about branding. In the case of B2C branding, I would like to argue most of the time it's about the functional benefits. Okay, when I'm selling you sunglasses, it's not really how easy it is going to be getting them, and I really don't know who you are, but I really have some great sunglasses that I showed in the Matrix, and you're just going to be looking like Neo, and it's going to be really cool. And that is the core benefit that you're selling. Okay, and the brand is going to be about that, really. In business to business, it's very hard to sell or to create a brand on functional benefits. Why? Because oftentimes the functional benefits really are reduced to some specifications. The clients are quite sophisticated. They know the specs. They actually prescribe the specs for you, and you really just have to meet those specifications. And it is really hard to do perception management in this environment. Really, are you cutting it or are you not cutting it? In some sense, you can quite objectively be compared to some of the competitors. So there is relatively little branding opportunity here, unless you're a monopolist and you're like owning a certain set of specifications. On the other hand, you have plenty of opportunities to create brand in process and relationship benefits. This is where human interactions matter. This is where perceptions make a huge difference. So oftentimes, you know, when I'm talking to business people and business-to-business marketers, they tell me, well, it's so hard to build a brand. What is really B2B branding about? Well, I'm telling them there's plenty of opportunity, because on these benefits, you do have to convince people that you are the one that is taking care of them, that you are the one that is looking after the client, that you are the one that is flexible and is willing to get out of their way to actually help the customer. You know, think about a sales force having a wonderful relationship with the client base. That's a huge advantage in terms of a huge competitive advantage. And oftentimes the brand is really about this relationship. Okay, so one of the things I would like to explore in the course in much more detail is, you know, how do you build B2B brands? How do you create a value proposition in this space? How do you who is going to be doing it in the firm? Is it going to be some sort of marketing department? What tools do you have? Is it going to be working well with advertising? Well, quite frankly, not that much. And you will see that one of the key points that we will be making in this course is how much the sales force is important in this environment, how much marketing is really about sales as well. And you know, we will actually discuss the separation, or the fact that it doesn't make much sense to separate these two functions that much in a B2B environment. Okay, so here is one illustration where this is, I believe, a dramatic difference. I would also like to emphasize that social media, that we all think is really a new marketing tool for B2C brands. Actually, I would like to convince you that social media is incredibly efficient for B2B marketing, even if it's not done, even if you don't see it being done that much with B2B marketers, industrial marketers, who are always lagging a little bit behind B2C marketers historically. But I would like to argue, and I would like to show a case actually in the course about how to use social media for B2B branding. And notice that social media is really about relationships. It's really about staying connected. It's really about building a community. Well, it turns out that where you're building brands in B2B marketing, it is actually these domains. So let me move on and talk about a couple of other implications. So one of the things I mentioned already is that I'm looking forward to exploring brand building in this space. I'm also looking forward in exploring the type of marketing tools that you have in this space to allocate your marketing budget. We talked about the importance of the decision-making process with the customers. Well, how do you discover this decision-making process? What tools do you have to influence this decision-making process? How much do they cost? How should we optimally allocate our resources to these different tools? And then the special role of the sales force. As I said, marketing and sales cannot really be separated or shouldn't really be separated. What is it that the sales force can do to you in this effort, not just in terms of closing the transaction, in terms of making the transaction, but also in terms of building the brand and creating this great relationship with the client. And then finally, I mentioned already that we're going to be looking at especially on how to use social media, which is, I think, a headache to pretty much every marketer today, or anybody teaching marketing actually today. But particularly so, I believe, for B2B marketers. And then, of course, we will not be able to avoid some of the very important topics like pricing and advertising and those other things that I really don't want to get into in much more detail. So let me actually stop here and ask whether you have any questions to me, and hopefully I can answer them for you.
Yeah, sure, Miklos, thank you so much, and we do invite you to ask questions in the chat. I think I'll just pick up on something that you just said, which is social media. Important to B2B, also a headache. I think a lot of people in this room and in lots of other rooms will agree that social can be a headache, and one reason is often the ROI is unclear. Can you talk about that? How do we think about that?
Yes, yes, I believe that this is true, and there are many problems. So one of the issues is when it comes to ROI, of course, the question is how much you're spending and how much you're getting back. And clearly, one of the biggest issues is that people have a hard time estimating how much they are getting back. But it's not really rocket science. So there are situations. So you can, for example, one of the things that social media can do in the B2B space, it can make the sales force relevant. It can be a conversation starter. And it's not very difficult to actually disentangle what is the additional role in making the sales force more efficient, and how can you attach a dollar figure to the extra efficiency of the sales force. Another thing with respect to process benefits. So think about a customer support system, a service, an after-sales service, or warranty, or really customer support. It's a very expensive endeavor. Often you have call centers, often you have a large infrastructure involved. Well, much of that can be moved online, and much of social media can help this be much more efficient. So right there again, it is not that difficult to figure out how much I'm saving by using social media. So there are ways to actually attach some returns to your usage of social media, and because you can measure the activity that well, maybe there are not that many standard measures like you have in television advertising, but you do have heuristics on how to approach the problem. On the spending side, of course, because ROI comes from two things, right? How much you're getting, but also how much you're spending. On the spending side, there is this myth that social media is cheap, that you can just set up a Facebook page or a LinkedIn page and everything is going to fall into place. Well, it's not true, and that's another myth that I would like to make sure that we learn in this course, is that running a successful social media infrastructure is actually quite expensive. You need great talent, people who are comfortable with data, but who are also having people skills that are quite extraordinary. So these people are expensive, and you do need to invest a little bit in technology. You do need to invest in organizational change, which always has a cost. So there again, there are some ways to measure what does it cost, and then when you put the two together, you can actually come to an ROI estimate of what social media does for you. One of the things that is for sure the case is that you cannot avoid doing something about it. You can't just sort of ignore it and wait for other people to get ahead and use it really successfully, and then you start investing in it. That's not really the right strategy.
Miklos, we have a number of great questions coming in. I think I'll stay here on marketing for a minute, and some folks are asking about, sorry, a bunch of questions, I'm scrolling through all of them. It's good that they're all coming in at once. Thinking about the sales and the marketing operation and sales being separate, and what does that sort of we know what that looks like in B2C. What does it look like when they're not separate, when they're together? What does that organization look like?
Yes, so I mentioned basically how important in the B2B space it is still to build a brand. And one of the points I would like to make is that the sales force has an extraordinary role in building the brand and building these relationships. So, usually when we think about branding, we sort of like subcontract that to the marketing department. And in B2C, it's very often what happens. Most of the spending is on advertising, some large advertising or marketing campaigns, and that is what builds the brand. Well, in B2B, it's impossible to do that. It's not advertising layouts that are going to build a brand. It's going to be some advertising, and a lot of different other activities. But the sales force is going to have a very important role because of this relationship part of the brand. So you cannot shy away from integrating the activities of these two entities in the organization. So there are different ways of doing it. You can sometimes actually organizationally integrate them, have a common manager and call it the sales and marketing department. In some other cases, because of some operational issues, it's better to keep them separate. But what you need, even in that case, what you need to absolutely ensure is that there is enough communication between the two. That the marketing people with their measurement of customer perceptions are feeding back to the salespeople. The marketing people are listening to the salespeople because they are the ones who are in touch with the customer, so they are like a market research tool. It would be foolish not to listen to them. They speak to the customers all the time. So that relationship needs to be very, very smooth across these two entities in the company. And this is a very important point, I think, of this course, and a very important message that you really have to work on that to be efficient.
Miklos, we've got a great question, and some folks seconded that question, saying, yeah, please ask this question. I think it's a really interesting question. The listener says, can you please say a few words on B2B2C marketing? For example, insurance provider sells health insurance to customers via their employer. Where is the marketing emphasis, on the employer, B2B, or on the employee and customer, B2C?
That's an excellent point. And this goes back to this idea that I said at the very beginning, that you're selling products that are used to create other products. And in this case, you're selling a service that is being provided to an end customer by your customer. And so here you really this gets into the world. I really like to use this buzzword, consultative sales. So when you sell this product to your client, you need to almost like put yourself in their shoes and ask yourself, how do they create benefits to their constituencies, to their employees in this case. And that is extra work. It means that you will have to have someone exploring your client's needs, because you cannot ignore that in the efficient sales process. And that is an extra layer of difficulty in B2B marketing, that you really need to understand your customer's business. And that is why, again, salespeople are important. They are not just into sales. They are not just into closing the deal, into telling the client what the parameters of the deal are. They are also trying to help the client. They are trying to sort of solve their problem. And that creates, how do you compensate these people, for example? If it's a transactional sales, you can easily think about, commissions, commission-based compensation system. But for example, if you want your salespeople to be consultants to some extent, then a commission-based sales compensation system is not going to work. So there are a lot of implications of how much this matters, how much the sales is consultative to the marketing process and the sales process. And this is, again, something that we are exploring in the course in quite some depth.
Miklos, could you, we're going to wrap up in just a minute here, but we've got just a few more minutes to go, and a few more questions to go, sorry. I want to ask, what are the metrics that you think are most effective in terms of evaluating your B2B marketing activities?
I'm planning to speak about this, but I believe that one of the key things to do, and again, I'm getting back to the sales force, but one of the key things to do is like to estimate how efficient your sales force is. and benchmark. It's very hard to do. Why? Because you cannot experiment. So when you think about other marketing variables like advertising, you can shut down campaigns, restart campaigns, you can do controlled experiments across geographies and whatnot. With Salesforce, you can do these controlled experiments because these are people, or you have a very limited way of doing them. Let me put it that way. You cannot just fire and hire them. This is extremely costly. This is long-term investment into them. So you need to develop some methodologies to figure out how to measure the effectiveness of the sales force. Most of the time, this boils down to an advanced benchmarking problem. Now, I'm saying advanced benchmarking. It's not just benchmarking. It's not just looking at competitors, what they do. You have got to go a little further than that. And there is a buzzword called Delphi procedures. And again, I talk about it in the course, but briefly, it is really sort of an estimation method of on how effective your sales force is. And I think that again, this is a slightly different problem and a little more complex problem than in B2C.
Yes, Miklos, thank you so much for being with us. I want to invite people who are with us right now. First of all, thank you. These are great questions. It's exciting to see everyone so engaged, so many interesting things to talk about. We're going to wrap up, but I'm going to share with you the link to our LinkedIn group. And if you have some additional questions, go ahead into the LinkedIn group and post them, and we'll keep the conversation going. Miklos, before we do wrap, I wonder if you could just talk about, and maybe I can show the grid for this session, maybe you could just talk about how what we talked about here today fits into the larger program coming up in October.
Okay, that sounds great.
And I'll share that with everyone in
just a second.
There you go.
So it's really a very intense course, 3 days. In fact, 6 half. I like to think about it as 6 half days. And we will jump right into the middle with B2B branding. How do we create value in the B2B space? How do we deliver that value? We are going to be talking about the cases. We are going to be talking about a bunch of tools to estimate, the effectiveness of and the identity of a B2B brand. Then in the afternoon, we are going to be connecting this to competitive advantage. And I find this very important because oftentimes what I found is that an efficient organization, an efficient marketing organization is one that connects to the corporate strategy, to the business unit strategy really well. So the marketer needs to speak the language of the CEO, and how the CEO and the marketers can communicate is a very important thing. Now for that, marketers need to put a little more emphasis on competitive advantage, which is really the top headache of the CEO. And I think we are too much into value creation and not enough into how are we going to sustain this in the long term, and how are we going to make sure that the CEO is going to be happy. So at the afternoon, I would like to connect branding and good marketing to competitive advantage. The second and the third days are a little bit more operational. Obviously, we talk about pricing, which is sort of the most important value extraction methodology. Talk about the different methods there, and pricing contracts. How are they different from just sticking a price on a product? And then in the afternoon we start exploring, the decision-making process. How to think about it. What are the concepts that you need to know in order to figure out the decision-making process for your organization? And in this afternoon, we are also going to be talking about the role of social media, which is one of the marketing weapons that you have to address this decision-making process. And I have a great case for you, Mars Klein, that has used a very, very efficient and great, social media marketing process. And then the final day is going to be really about Salesforce management. How to think about the size of the sales force, how to allocate them, what are the roles that the sales force need to do. What about compensation systems, tangible and intangible compensation? How do you motivate these people? You can't just throw money at them. That's an important problem. How do you organize and engineer the compensation system, the formal one? But also, how do you create a group of very excited and really go-get attitude salespeople? This is some of the things that we are exploring on the third day. First, in the context of regular product, then in the context of professional services. And then, really the afternoon on the third day is going to be a summary and a Q&A and, trying to explore in more depth some of the issues that you raised during the course.
That sounds wonderful. Miklos, thank you so much. We're really excited about your new program, Business to Business Marketing Strategy, coming up in October. We thank you very much for your time here today, and we thank all of you for being with us. Again, I'll send you over now to our LinkedIn page. We do hope that you join us there, continue conversations, be part of our executive community, over 3,000 members strong. And we look forward to seeing you soon at another one of our online events or online courses, or right here at our campus in New York City. Thanks again for being with us. We hope to see you soon. Take care.